There are many controversial modern psychological issues, including midlife crisis. Some people feel half dead, while others think hypocritical. Does midlife crisis only happen on the male? Does it only appear between 40 to 50? If you are stuck with it, watch out this video. In the end, you will find the key. Hi, I'm Miss Y. Today, midlife crisis has become so popular worldwide. However, the guy who created this term seemed to successfully skip it over. Back to 1957 in London, a Canadian psychologist, Elliot Jaques, addressed a speech about his new essay, Death and Midlife Crisis, in the meeting of a British Psychoanalytical Society. Since that day, the term midlife crisis was born. According to Jaques, the midlife crisis is such a crisis that many great artists and thinkers fail to survive it. I had the impression, explained Jaques, that the age of 37 seemed to figure prominently the deaths of individuals in this category. So he decided to crunch the numbers with a random sample of 310 of such geniuses. And indeed, he discovered that considerable numbers of these formidable talents, including Mozart, Raphael, Chopin, Rimbaud, Purcell, succumbed to some kind of tragic. Those study samples also include George Orwell, the author of dystopian novel 1984. When he was 40, 6 years before he died, he wrote, "Any life, when viewed from the inside, is simply a series of defeats." In ordinary people's symptoms include religious awakening, promiscuity, sudden inability to enjoy life, hypochondriac concern over health and appearances, compulsive attempts to remain young. This period is sparked by the realization that their lives are halfway over, especially people in midlife that forever go by to their parents, that death isn't something just happened on someone else, but themselves. Elliot Jaques described a depressed 36-year-old patient who told his therapist, "Up until now, life has seemed to endless upward slope, with nothing but a distant horizon in view. Now suddenly I seem to have reached the crest of the hill, and there, stretching ahead, is a downward slope with the end of a road in sight. Far enough away, it's true, but there is death, observably present at the end." Jaques didn't claim himself to be the first who detected the midlife crisis. He pointed out there were some evidence in the 14th century, but Jaques offered a modern and clinical explanation. Crucially, he gave the experience a catchy name, the midlife crisis. After that, many psychologists started to participate in the academic studies of midlife crisis. Basically, it's about the fear of death and the stagnation of self-growth. Let's see what they have found. Early back in 2000 years ago, the Greek philosopher Aristotle once thought that we grew into a prime of life, with the body achieving the fullest development at the age of 35 and the mind at 49. Some researchers also found that the notion of midlife crisis began with Sigmund Freud, who thought that during the mid-age, everyone's thought was driven by the fear of impending death. Jonathan Theory in analytical psychology posits that midlife is key to individuation, a process of self-actualization and self-awareness that contains many potential paradoxes. But some researchers found the bright side of midlife and its stagnation. Erik Erikson, the German-American developmental psychologist, his life state of generativity versus stagnation also coincides with the idea of midlife crisis. In this stage, adults begin to understand the pressure of being committed to improving the life of generations to come. A person realized the inevitability of self-mortality, and the value of this stage is to creating the better world for the next generation. In order for human race to grow, days in 1970s, the midlife crisis used to be incredibly popular. How much? Everybody seemed to believe they are having midlife crisis after a bestseller book published. In 1977, Jill Shelley, investigative journalist, published her book passage, predictable crisis of adult life, toward the midlife crisis from a psychological perspective. After interviewing many midlifers, she concluded that women too experience the midlife crisis. They just had them earlier than men. The year of 35 to 39 are the fidelity years for women, because middle-aged women illusion of youthful appearance and romantic love. But after solving through all this about midlife crisis, here comes Miss White's question. In terms of increasing lifespan of human beings, in last thousands of years, is our midlife the same as our ancestors? According to the data from Harvard University, if you are a man born in 1900, you only have 50% of chance to live until the age 60. At that time, the average life expectancy for men was about 52. That's to say, actually it was fair to think the age around 40 in Jacques' symbols such as Mozart, Raphael, Sobin, actually was the beginning of the end of life. And I'm not the only one who argue and challenge the middle life notion. Since 1980s, many scholars in the United States after researches also disagreed. According to Atlantic magazine, most people don't have a crisis, says Martin Lanchman of Brandeis University, a member of the original Manners team. Lanchman says midlifers are typically healthy, have busy social life, and are at the earning peaks of their careers, so people are pretty satisfied. Lanchman also said, people have crises through their whole life, not just in the midlife. So many problems like a job loss, a divorce, or healthy problem actually not only belongs to middle life. Just 10 to 20% of Americans have an experience that qualifies as a midlife crisis, according to the Manners and other studies. As this data rolled in, many scientists abandoned the idea of the middle life crisis is biological. They regarded it mostly as a cultural construct. The same mass media that had once heralded the middle life crisis began trying to debunk it in dozens of news stories with variations on the title Myths of Midlife Crisis. So if you feel yourself stuck with the so-called midlife crisis, I have 2 tips may be useful to you. 1. Endure on it and adjust the ability to deal with disappointment in your life. According to the Hans Swartz, a scholar from Princeton University, knowing this phenomenon is so common can be therapeutic. Part of your disappointment is driven by the disappointment itself. He said if more and more people can understand the U-shaped pattern in our life, they might be less inclined to make forecasting errors that contribute to disappointment, and also less inclined to judge themselves harshly for feeling disappointed. Many studies indicated that happiness is U-shaped. A gradual decline in happiness began in the late teen years and continued until an individual in his or her 40s. After that, the happiness feelings can grow again. Data on 500,000 of Europeans and Americans found this trend true. Compared to the people who were in their 40s felt their all-time low, individuals in their 60s reported they feel happier than ever before. So this is to say maybe the structure of your life won't change too much, but the capability of learning how to adjust and deal with disappointments probably can help you out. Tip 2. To do something else to drift your attention. Here the best example is the author L. Jacques, who created midlife crisis this term. His death and midlife crisis was so popular and published a lot, though in his midlife he moved to another field. He became a specialist in workplace relations and devised a way to measure workers according to the amount of their working time to complete tasks. He consulted for the US Army and the Church of England about organizational structures and wrote about more than 20 books, but none of them about midlife crisis again. Even after Jacques died in 2003, according to his second wife, who co-founded an organization dedicated to propagating Jacques' ideas about the workplace. The midlife crisis was a tiny little early piece of work that he did, and something Jacques didn't want to whom to talk about after 20 or 30 years. So will you go through a midlife crisis? Me? Never will I believe it!